in the words of Chinua Achebe, if you don't like somebody else's story, write your own.
In 10 years, the number of forcibly displaced have grown 4 times.
All refugees, regardless their host country, they can expect to benefit from fair and sustainable conditions.
Welcome to State of Africa, where we are fostering dialogue and advancing conversations that drive Africa's progress. I'm Julie Gishuru, President and CEO of the Africa Leadership and Dialogue Institute, ALADI. Thank you for joining us. In Africa, over 45 million forcibly displaced people seek refuge in host communities. They are often viewed through a humanitarian lens. Yet within these communities is immense potential for the continent, untapped economic opportunity, skills, and talent. Within these communities are potentially robust markets. ALADI, supported by the MasterCard Foundation, joined key stakeholders convened by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, and the African Development Bank Group, along with the East African Community member states and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, to discuss and drive policy and practice shifts to unlock the economic and social potential of these communities. We start in Nairobi, where conversations and solutioning centered on transforming the business environment for refugees and host communities. Let's take a look at the statistics. The Eastern and Great Lakes and Horn of Africa region hosts over 89% of the continent's forcibly displaced populations. Kenya and Uganda host a large share of these communities. Among them are remarkable entrepreneurs like Mesfin Getahun, a refugee running a business in Kakuma Camp, Kenya, and Vanessa Ishimwe, thriving in Chaka Settlement, Uganda. Despite immense challenges, they have created opportunities that have made a difference to the lives of so many within their communities. They shared their stories and perspectives on key issues with Georgine Dirango.
Vanessa Ishimwe is from Uganda. She's the founder of Authentic African Works that operates primarily within the Chaka 2 settlement in Uganda, and who then gives back to the community. We'll get to hear a bit more. Her journey, phenomenal. Mesfin Getahun is a regional wholesaler. That's the most humble way to put it. But when we went to Kakuma to see his business, he's the only shop that had a chandelier outside. Whether it was real or not, we don't know. But he does have a thriving business that also gives back to the community. We were there probably for 1 hour, 2 hours, but there were a lot of people coming to ask Mesfin, you know, can we get some assistance? Can we get some assistance on 1 or 2 things? So there's a lot of things that we do not understand about the 2 businesses represented here that we'll unpack. You did set up an organization before that has now evolved and you're now doing something else. Yeah. But so before I moved to Mesfin, there was a period in your life where the only thing you worried about was, I just want to get out of this situation. And now you understand what that means. You've taken on a business. So then you're now thinking about, okay, so how do I make sure the business moves on, whether I have money or not, whether I have support or not. And now there's a lot more people that depend on you as well. So how have you reconciled the 2? Your dreams then, and now the reality of what your dreams mean and the kind of gravitas and what a lot of people expect from you?
So first of all, most businesses, especially in Uganda or many places, they start out of necessity. And so did mine, honestly, because I needed to make money, I needed to go to school. And over the years, like I said, I realized I wasn't the only one looking to go to school and who was struggling with school fees. right? And I decided that as part of my way to give back to my community and also being there for someone who does not have someone who is there for them to pay their school fees, I would set aside some profit to take girls to school. And next year, I think we're enrolling 10 girls in secondary school to finish senior 5 and senior 6, and hopefully get scholarships when they pass very well.
But hebu tueleze mahali ulianza kujua sasa wewe ni mfanyabiashara, hapo miaka kadhaa kabla ya hapo ulianza vipi Kakuma?
So my name is Mesfin. Jina yangu Mesfin. So I'm Ethiopian. Kwanza namwambia asante sana Mungu Yesu Kristo abariki nyinyi. Tunapenda sana Yesu. Yesu ndo anabariki mimi. Mimi natoka Ethiopia 2001. Naingia Kenya. Serikali ya Kenya imekubali mimi after hiyo UNHCR imekubali meenda Kakuma. UNHCR na safe mimi nachukua chakula ya refugee every month. After hiyo watu naandikia mikazi 1,000 Kenyan shilling. 1,000 Kenyan shilling 1 month. Watu refugee ndo naandikia mimi Ethiopians community ndo naandikia. After hiyo natengeneza coffee. After hiyo natengeneza mandasi natambia barabara. Ndo pole pole nafanyia biashara. After hiyo nafungua duka kidogo. After hiyo wholesale. Hivyo naendelea na supermarket na supply motorbike South Sudan na Uganda na Kakuma refugee camp.
Thank you, Mesfin, for the good work that you are doing. I'm wondering, have you considered training them in the business that you are doing so that they could take that entrepreneurship pathway as a form of employment?
Ako na almost watu 35 nafungulia biashara. 35 kuna Turkana na refugee. Nafanya biashara lakini hauzi napatia pesa ya bure. Nafungulia duka, ameenda na chunga na every month na UNHCR kuna bamba chakula, pesa naingia siku hawa naletea tena nachukua vitu. Ndio nafundisha hawa na karibu Turkana 8 almost sai nafika Turkana moja kuna nafika pesa yake almost sai 1,800,000 na hata loan napata nafundisha mwachae nalipea pesa yangu ingine naendelea na mimi kama watoto hivyo nalipea ingine naendelea na nafungulia biashara.
The commonality between Vanessa and Mesfin is that they're giving back to the community, at least within reason, and where there's some financial aspect to it coming back to the business, but the impact is way beyond them. So that's why we left that part out, because we need to know where the support comes in. They're operating from, we want to survive, but at some point, it becomes less about you and more about where you serve. So where did the support come in for you?
So I started with my savings from my job, from my first job. But then I kept talking to different people about the business, just the same way I am talking to this crowd of people about the business. And I think also I've been in platforms or in organizations that are really, really supportive. For example, I am part of the Youth Advisory Committee for the MasterCard Foundation. And I think that is a very great platform that has given me access to other opportunities. And that is how I actually met Anna from UNHCR, Anna with a G, last name. And the support that I'm given, the feedback, the getting people to tell other people about my business, I think that is very, very good. But also I work with another organization, a local refugee-led organization to support me in finances, like when I need a loan or I have, say, an big order that I can't finance immediately and I need to borrow money from them, and I'm given that money and then I can pay it back later after I have cleared the sale.
Would you mention one area that you could advocate on behalf of refugee-led organizations, and how can we put actually money on their pockets, since they are doing a lot in the community, and you've mentioned they are even giving loan, and how can they be partners of these big agencies? And I'm asking this as a refugee representative from Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to take that one?
I think you've already done the advocacy by just mentioning that there is need for more money in the pockets of refugee-led organizations. You realize within communities, especially refugee communities, that refugee-led organizations are playing a very, very huge role in supporting fellow refugees. It is easier for me, even when I am really well connected within my community, but it is easier for me to approach a refugee-led organization for support than it would be for me to go to, say, an NGO that is based wherever it is that they're based at the bus camp in the settlement. So there is indeed need for more money for funding to go directly to refugee-led organizations, and because I think it's the more sustainable way to support refugee communities and to support self-reliance among the refugees, yeah.
We've heard the voices from the communities. Now let's hear from the leaders who set the stage for discussions on driving investment and economic growth in uncharted territories.
As it has been said, now sadly, our region hosts the largest number of displaced persons globally. This is the region that we have, 5.5 million refugees, 21.3 million internally displaced, exceeding the numbers we were thinking were going to happen in 2024. After all this, the reality is that this represents a humanitarian responsibility, but colleagues, since yesterday, today, and tomorrow, it's also representing significant economic opportunity. And that's what we are going to talk today, as well as tomorrow. This is a large workforce, vibrant consumer market, and an untapped wellspring of entrepreneurial energy, like those we see whenever you go to borders and you see people affected. And this is what all of us are going to do here. We are going to talk about it, reflecting about these opportunities, discussing them, and taking this approach to the next level. Partners, ladies and gentlemen, the region and the government and their communities have consistently demonstrated visionary thinking and pioneering approaches to refugee inclusion, and today we build on that foundation. Over the past 2 years, UNHCR, together with IGAD, EAC, as well as government and partners, have undertaken efforts to understand and address barriers to economic and financial inclusion in refugee hosting areas. In Uganda, estimates are that 3% of the GDP is being contributed by refugees or through refugee hosting areas. In Kenya's Turkana country, refugee presence has driven a 3.4% increase in employment and 6% boost in per capita income. These are not just statistics, they represent the tangible economic dividend of refugee inclusion. And through our consultations, we have identified 5 very important key areas that hold tremendous promise for transformation. One is agriculture and value chain, leveraging diverse skills and creating sustainable opportunities. Infrastructure development, number 2, connecting communities and enabling economic activities, including possible cross-border. Skills development, number 3, matching talent with market needs and the opportunities that exist. Cross-border trade, as I had said earlier, harnessing refugees' unique cross-cultural networks, and finally, financial inclusion. So our task is to work together, government, development partners, private sector, refugees, internally displaced, and representatives of host communities to remove barriers. These barriers have been leading us to let down communities. They have been leading us to lose human capital. Let's remove these barriers so that we can create opportunities where businesses can grow and where people can live dignified lives. Finally, colleagues, partners, friends, let me thank you. Let me thank all of you for what you have done, for what we see, for what we are doing now. But also allow me to advise that we keep up. This was never something easy. It's not easy, and I am sure it has never been easy. However, if we all work together, I am definitely clear, I'm definitely convinced that we can remove the barriers and we can help this human capital flourish. There are solutions, let's seize them, and they are essential for our communities, the communities we are serving. I look forward to the result of our deliberations, and let's remember these leadership requirements, and I have no doubt that we will seize them.
We have two main criteria. The first criteria is the bank's approach, and the second criteria is about the holistic approach for the bank. So we spoke about holistic approach because around investment climate, for us, what is most important is to go beyond specific projects so that for all refugees, regardless their host country, they can expect to benefit from fair and sustainable conditions. Most important for us is to continue with the mandate of the banks. This mandate remains as pertinent as ever. What we do is to let no one behind towards inclusive growth. This is the most important, and for fragile in transition countries, because this is how we call country in fragile situation. In the bank, we prefer using transition countries. As for us, it's just a transition. So for us, it's good to let no one behind. So in this, the most important for us is the reason why, instead of thinking only about humanitarian, we know that humanitarian is important and is the first stage, but we know that now there are protected situations, so we have to think about the future and to think about resilient and bright future. This is why for us it was important to think about how we can catalyze private investment in this situation, in these areas, knowing that there is many opportunities in these places and return for investment guaranteed for them. I would like to commend also private sector intervention in such areas. I don't mention their name to avoid forgetting some of them, but I think it's a good thing to have this experience, and also during the workshop to have opportunity to let them explain to all of us how it's important to invest them, and the fact that host communities and also refugees are trusted people.
Refugees, displaced persons, and host communities are not just survivors. They are contributors to economic growth. They are customers for the next big brand. Progressive policies and the partnerships in the region are fundamental in shaping the business environment for these communities. When done right, this has a significant impact on a country's economy. In Uganda, refugee entrepreneurs contribute almost 3% of the country's GDP. But how can the region synchronize efforts at policy level to ensure continued success? Jeff Motte spoke to Annette Semuemba, the Deputy Secretary General of Customs, Trade and Monetary Affairs at the East African Community Secretariat. Let's see what she had to say.
How connected are we to the fact that our brothers, our neighbors' prosperity or failure is directly linked to ours? You could be a refugee at any time, anytime. How is it from where you stand?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. And it's my pleasure to be here and to be joining this very important workshop and a very important conversation, as you have said. Anyone can become a refugee at any time. And we don't really think about it. Although now as the numbers continue to grow, especially in the region, there's more awareness because we now meet more people that are refugees, and we have a better understanding of the situations that they go through. Many of them leave behind families, leave behind livelihoods, live with nothing. And it's a really, really scary situation. And what this conversation is about is to try and bring back that dignity by putting in place frameworks that will empower them economically. And I did say that when your brother is in trouble, so are you. You can't just walk away and look away. Right. It's collective responsibility. And I'm really pleased that there's more awareness now. Mm-hmm. There's more awareness.
When you look at policy frameworks, what are currently in place to address economic inclusion of displaced populations within the East Africa community? Because there's a huge policy question right there. Mm. What are those currently in place working towards that?
All right. We have, first of all, I'll give a broad framework. We have a number of protocols that have been signed, which I mentioned, protocols on movement of goods, protocols on the common market that include movement of people, movement of services, movement of labor. And these are not limited to East African citizens. They are for people living within the East African community, including refugees. So that's a broader policy framework. Mm-hmm. And in addition, we also are working on very specific policies that are related to migration, that are related to internally displaced persons. And we have a team that's formulating and working on these policies. This issue has become more prominent within the agenda of the East African community. And it's a matter that is also under discussion by the relevant sectoral committees to ensure that we can fast track these policies related specifically to migration. But more broadly, we have in place a refugee should be able to move as long as they have an ID within the community. Mm-hmm. And they should be able to find an economic opportunity elsewhere. The frameworks that in place should be able to guide that. They should be able to engage in cross-border trade using the instruments that have been approved for movement of goods across borders.
Right. Our rallying call right at the beginning of this particular workshop was it's an all-hands-on-deck approach. It's been repeated over and over. We need all of these actors to come together to deliver what you're talking about in this particular agenda. What partnerships is the EAC making with international organizations and private sector towards this particular economic empowerment and inclusivity for these particular communities?
We have partnerships with the UNHCR, of course, whose main mandate is to look after these people. We have a partnership with the International Organization for Migration. They work with us and have been a part of this analysis that is being discussed. We work with the East Africa Business Council, which brings together the private sector in the region. And again, a key point that I took away is to bring the visibility of this matter to the East African Business Council, because many times they engage with big businesses, and sometimes this is a sector that could be easily forgotten, and yet they have the potential to build industries or to put in place economic activity in those regions. We also have partnerships with other funding partners like the Africa Development Bank, again, who have been critical to this process, who we will continue to work with to ensure that we can leverage each other's resources and technical expertise to move forward on this agenda of economic empowerment for refugees. Of course, I always say, too many cooks can spoil the soup. So we need to be very organized, so we know who's putting in what and where and how to avoid this very lovely program that is going to empower a huge part of our population, our brothers and sisters. It needs to be predictable, it needs to be very well understood, and also we need to avoid politicization of some of these issues in a way that takes them away from the main agenda of economic empowerment.
Okay. Studies, research has shown how including these particular communities has a direct dividend to GDP, even in those hosting countries as well. From where you stand and where you sit as Deputy Secretary General, and you're looking at this particular scenario, what's your performance indicator? What's your metric of success in terms of enhancing this investment climate? What did you look at down the road and be like, that's a tick, we did get it right?
Our measure of success will be, one, on the number of jobs that we can create for people that are living in IDPs, are living in camps, in refugee settlements. That will be a key measure. Another key measure will be on the level of infrastructure that has been put in place that extends to these communities, so that we can allow them to also join the economy and be able to move easily and be able to transport their wares and their goods. Our third measure will be on skills. It's another issue that has been raised. We want to see the extent to which, and engaging with, of course, TVET institutions and partners in the different partner states of the ESC, how many people can be skilled so that they have some technical knowledge to be able to start their own activities, or to be able to use those skills to be able to develop themselves. Other measures could be in terms of income, those that didn't have an income at all, that now have an income. It's going to take some time, and some countries are doing better than others, but it's going to be an agenda that we're going to be very, very much focused on. We haven't started to monitor and evaluate these numbers, although in some partner states this is being done, and we've had in the room other partner states where refugees contribute at least 3% of the GDP comes from the activity of these communities. So we want to see more of that, we want to measure more of that, and together as a partnership, I'm sure we will be able to achieve our ambition.
Okay, and finally, when you bring it back home, because you've given us the North Star of what this looks like in terms of job creation, infrastructure, skills development, but let's talk about this workshop. On day 3, as we leave this particular venue and go back to our respective organizations and countries, what would you want to take out of this in terms of action?
As you will probably have heard since the workshop started, we've been working towards an action plan that is aligned to 6 key priorities, some of which are those that I've just mentioned. And so my key takeaway will be the key areas that have been identified for which responsibility for implementation lies with regional economic communities such as the ESC. Of course, we have IGAD in the room, and perhaps others that are not in the room. My key takeaway will be, what are those actions that have been agreed, and that we take them away and we develop our own plans to start implementation, because we've agreed the actions. So what is next? Implementation. Okay. And that is what I will be looking to.
The theme of regional cooperation and coordination could not have been overstated in this convening. Victoria Anip, the head of social development at IGAD, engaged Jeff Motte not just with facts and data, but with a lived experience, having grown up as a refugee.
This is a very personal story for you. It's not a white paper, it's not a case study, it's not research. You were a refugee from Egypt to Australia, now working and impacting in your own very powerful way. When you look back at the young Dr. Victoria and now, in terms of the challenges of economic inclusion, have they changed, or is the scenario still the same?
Thank you for the opportunity for hosting me for this interview. Definitely it has changed. I've come a long way from being a refugee in Egypt, where there's no access to any opportunities for livelihood, no access to basic things like SIM card. I was a young doctor finishing medical school. I couldn't do my internship there. It wasn't easy for me. I have to juggle and do other odd jobs to survive. And before moving to Australia on a refugee visa, and in Australia it was not easy as well. Being an overseas trained doctor, you have to do a series of exams, sitting for as simple as doing an English test first, and then doing an MCQ for all the medical subjects, doing a clinical exam, It takes some people 5-6 years to finish those exams. But I managed to finish the exams and qualify to work as a doctor in the Australian workforce. So I've come a long way from someone struggling to adjust in a new society, to adjust, to get, to be part of the community, to integrate, to now someone who is contributing back to the community, giving back to my country. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the work. Let's talk about IGAD. Let's talk about enhancing the investment climate. What role is IGAD playing in enhancing that investment climate within the region, as an overview?
IGAD's biggest mandate is regional integration and economic development of its citizens. And I think IGAD is doing a lot of work in terms of policy, supporting the policy environment. IGAD has done policy frameworks and that help refugees and displaced communities to integrate and have economic productivity. One example is the durable solution. IGAD has worked on the Nairobi Declaration durable solution for Somali refugees that has taken shape, and also the durable solution for Sudan, South Sudan. IGAD is also doing work in terms of the regional qualification framework. Recently, a couple of months back in Uganda, all ministers in charge of education signed the regional qualification framework. That helps your qualification to be recognized in the region, in the IGAD region. And that will help you with, getting opportunity for employment, getting to do your further studies. Some people, like the young girl today, talking about not having access to university. So that helps people in the region who want to study, for instance, moving from your own country, like the Sudanese now moving to all the other regions. They are able to get through the regional qualification framework to do their studies. There's also recognition of prior learning, which is also a bonus. Your prior learning can be recognized and you continue your education and you get employment through this one.
And even as you talk about that, because collaboration will be very key in terms of your advocacy, in terms of policy change. How's IGAD collaborating with your national governments, your regional economic communities on this particular agenda? Because national
governments is where we work. We work with member states because these are our member states. And we work with member states to push for policy reform, push for policy implementations, try to do policies that are, inclusive of refugees, policies that are climate smart, and of course, with other regional economic blocs, we work with EAC most closely because most of the member states are members of the EAC as well. So we work closely with East African Community, but also we work with ECOWAS and with other regional economic blocs. Of course, with our partners, donors, we do work closely with African Development Bank. UNHCR is top of the agenda when it comes to refugees. It's unavoidable to work with them. So we have a very close collaboration with UNHCR when it comes to working with refugees and displaced communities.
From where you stand and how IGAD envisions this, how does it feel it would leverage private sector and other actors for this economic inclusion? When you look at that end goal, when you get your 10 out of 10, what does that partnership look like?
Economic inclusion is impossible without private sector. And I think we need to, private sector is our best bet. We need to invest in private sector. And we have a good example of the Equity Bank working in refugee areas. And I think the government on its own cannot do it. The governments are also, many of the governments in the IGAD region are struggling on their own to deal with their own citizens. And civil society and also the national NGOs are struggling with funding landscape now diminishing, and people are tending towards more humanitarian. And with the current situation, the current influx of refugees, the conflicts that are arising in different parts of the world, it's more tending towards the humanitarian part. So I think including the private sector is very important, and that's why IGAD with AFDB and UNHCR have come here today to look into the investment climate. And a lot of scoping mission has been done in different countries in the region. And from the data and from the outcome of those consultations, it has become evidently clear that private sector engagement is paramount in this, and it's very important to include them in the conversation.
Okay. Last question on this one, and this one I ask you both as Dr. Victoria, the girl who gave her passionate story from Egypt to Australia and back to give back, but also as a head of social development unit at IGAD. Once all is said and done at this workshop, what do you want us to leave with? What take home, what action point would you want as people leave this particular workshop?
The take home is that refugees are not a burden. They can contribute to economic development. What we want to leave with it is that we don't want policies and discussions that will end up on paper. We want implementation, because implementation is very important, it's paramount, and we need to take this conversation to the ground and to implement the policies and the things we're discussing here. We want an action that has to be implemented, and that action that comes out has to shape the future of refugees inclusion in the region.
As a result of the dialogues in Nairobi, an important framework was presented: the pathway to refugee economic inclusion, which calls for an integrated approach to refugee access to documentation, infrastructure, freedom of movement, and financial inclusion. The region's largest banks, KCB and Equity Bank, shared their focus in enabling the inclusion of refugee communities into the formal economy.
I think the business case is really around the sheer size of the opportunity. Earlier today, we had different panelists speak about just the numbers of refugees, the host communities where they are, but more importantly, how dynamic this community of individuals and businesses is. There is a business case, coming in from a financial institution. It is really important for us to drive financial inclusion, to empower the individual, but more importantly, empower their businesses. So there is a business case to ensure that we provide innovative, meaningful solutions to drive up financial inclusion, empower their businesses, grow their businesses, and that is really at the core of what banking is.
For us to achieve or attain sustainable impact as far as transformation is concerned, we needed to play a more active role and looking then at our capabilities in terms of financial inclusion, we realized that we could integrate cash transfer programs with formal financial systems offering, so that then at the end of the day we have long-term benefits as far as financial inclusion is concerned. So we opened our doors then to the refugees, their hosts, internally displaced persons, the whole cohort of forceful displacement facet or category. For you to be able to see refugees and understand their potential, you have to first be willing to step into their spaces and understand where they are coming from. And then once you're there, that's when then your eyes are opened, and then you realize, okay, probably I came into this first with a social lens, with a humanitarian lens, but incidentally, there's a business case. You can expand your offering to accommodate that. So beyond it being a financial or a commercial strategy, you start with being purpose-driven. Mm-hmm. When you have ticked that box, then you come into now the business sense and start looking at refugees from a perspective of the potential they have. Because these are the same persons that came from their host countries as entrepreneurs, as high-profile individuals. They have been faced, they've become victims of circumstances then that have necessitated them to migrate. So still the same brains, mm-hmm. the same capacity, the same potential. And so if you possibly give them access to opportunities, access to, for example, maybe capital, they can be able to start businesses and build their livelihoods and benefit then the societies they live in. And what happens then from that perspective is once you support the refugees themselves, there is what we call a multiplier effect in the economies where they live. That multiplier effect, you might be even supporting them from a cash transfer perspective. But once the economy or the society that they're living in starts to thrive, the economies then start getting stimulated.
It's great to hear from our top banks and understand how they're playing a role. And we welcome engagement with other private sector actors. Now, the leveraging of refugee dual country experience for regional trade and the addition of refugee skills into the formal labor market of host countries are impactful ways countries in the region are including refugees in their marketplaces. Uganda provides a practical solution as to how to structure and plan for a cohesive community and how to build social ties.
In the workshop that we're at, we're talking about how to enhance the investment climate for refugee communities, marginalized communities as well. And for that to happen, you have to have at least some semblance of cohesiveness between the refugees and the host communities as well. For Uganda, how do you deal with probable tensions that might come up due to everybody coming in and making everybody feel at home in Uganda? Because that's something that is always, I'm sure, at the back of your minds. How do you deal with that?
We deal with that through proper targeting. Mm-hmm. In all our programs, we target both the refugees and the citizens, the refugees and the host communities. So whatever program is rolled out in the refugee settlements, that program has always had a component to benefit the host communities as well. And then we have also invested heavily on sensitization. Mm-hmm. We involve the refugees and the host communities in the planning, in decision making, in the monitoring of these programs, and even in reporting. Mm-hmm. And this promotes a peaceful coexistence and it reduces on the likelihood of friction. Mm-hmm. And it has worked well for us. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Indeed. And I mean, even as we come to the tail end of this particular conversation, you're a person coming from a country that is walking the walk. You don't you don't make pronouncements when it comes to this particular issue. You're literally showing people how it can be done and done successfully. What are the key commitments you're hoping will come out of this workshop? When we close on day 3 of this, what do you want the action piece to be as everybody goes back to their countries, their organizations?
The first one is really appreciation of the role of government in the refugee responses. Because whereas we have other implementing partners, what's important is really to strengthen the collaboration between governments. For instance, between Uganda, Kenya, Sudan, to ensure that there is peace in the region. So the first take is collaboration. The second one is mobilization of resources, both locally and internationally, because hosting refugees is a very expensive venture. And in order for it to succeed, you need to mobilize resources. The third issue that I will really expect to come out of this is sustainability of refugee programs. This calls for assured sources of funding, and then also ensuring that refugees are made self-reliant. Mm-hmm. Meaning, therefore, that all the actors should invest in such a way that the refugees are empowered to fend for themselves through self-reliance models, like the experiences we're sharing in Kakuma, where, for instance, the development partners are building the capacities of the refugees to start small businesses, for the refugees to become innovative. These are the approaches we require. Mm-hmm. And then, in addition to this, we really need as Africa to accord conducive environments for voluntary repatriation of refugees, so that the refugees who are domiciled outside their countries of origin, but within the region, are encouraged to return back home. For instance, I'm meant to know that in Kenya you are having Ugandan refugees here. Mm-hmm. We are now peaceful back home. We want to engage you and to assure you that the situation home is very good, so that these people can come back. Mm-hmm. So we need to put in place incentives for voluntary return, mm-hmm. so that people can return from back to their countries of origin. Mm-hmm. Those are some of the solutions that work for us.
There are several sectors that have a comparative advantage. Agriculture and agricultural value chains is one. The digital economy is another, and regional trade as well. But African sports also presents untapped opportunity. With the African Development Bank Group projecting an 8% growth in this sector over the next 3 to 5 years, NBA Africa CEO Claire Akamanzi highlights the business case for investing in sports talent within refugee, displaced, and host communities.
How do you balance, the pursuit of business, commercial interests, but also addressing this very social, challenge in terms of these particular communities that you will not leave behind? How do you balance those two interests?
We have to balance those two interests, because when we talk about developing sports on the continent, it's really about developing the ecosystem that allows us to maximize what sports can do for individuals, for teams, for organizations, for society. And how we balance that is, we think the best way to develop basketball or any sport is to make it an economic imperative, because once it does well as an economic opportunity, then it can sustain itself. But if it's just a by the way or a social responsibility, then someone always has to finance it, and it will never grow to the potential that it's supposed to. And that's what we're trying to change in the African continent. As we engage government leaders, business leaders, we're telling them, look, as you think about investing for the future, sports has to be one of those. Because Africa has a lot of talent. 10% of NBA players are from Africa. That's about 50 players, which is a very high number for a continent that doesn't really have the infrastructure to develop the talent. So the talent a lot of time goes accidentally. If you hear stories of people like Joel Embiid or Pascal Siakam, you'll hear accidental stories getting to the NBA. But what we want to make it is that it shouldn't be accidental. It should be intentional, because we have invested in the ecosystem that allows that to happen. And so that means building basketball courts, doing programs in schools, so schools can actually have basketball as one of the activities that kids grow up with, so that they can become consumers of sports, proponents of sports, but also play sports professionally for those that can make it.
When you talk about inclusive development, from what you've seen so far, how do we structure it? How do we put it in a way that it fosters inclusion of these particular communities as well? Because as you said, for those that you've seen, especially on the court, that wasn't the plan. It was accidental. So how do you make sure we're actually putting structures in place and fostering this inclusive development?
So for us, it's first of all the infrastructure you build. Take it to all communities. And today my plea to the group that was here looking at refugees is, let's build basketball courts in refugee camps. Because that means refugees get access to the game. They can play, they can build a talent. And who knows, there might be this 1 or 2, 3 people that are just so good, they just happen to be in a camp. How can we discover them? How do we find them? Because we do that by giving them access to the game, so the talent can really come out. The other one is around camps for us and clinics. So we take camps all over the continent. We take coaches, we take other professionals, we bring legends, we bring people that have done it to come and really, identify this talent and work with them towards the talent, and also show them what's possible. If you hear a story of Kaman from South Sudan, or you hear a story of Luol Deng and others, you as somebody, wherever you are, you can actually dream to be that, because talent is there. You may not be in the right place for that talent to be discovered, but if we can reduce the barriers to bring you closer, it's really infrastructure, it's facilities, it's camps, but more importantly also is some of the academies that we have. We have an NBA academy in Senegal. We're encouraging NBA schools. We're encouraging as much as possible schools wherever they are, including in rural areas, to be able to access basketball by bringing the courts there. So I think all of these things together, and not just NBA, I mean, we can't do everything. We're looking all the time for partners that can work with us, and these partnerships are going to bear fruit. And I must commend that here in Kenya, we've seen some great partnerships come along. Stanbic Bank has worked with us in South Sudan. Very, very good clinics we've done there. Junior NBA programs, we've built a basketball court. Come to Kenya, we just had a deal with Safaricom to bring junior NBA program to schools. We expect to touch 10,000 kids in schools. So these kinds of partnerships, bringing NBA expertise, NBA resources, but partnering with other resources on the continent.
Right. And let's talk more about that when you look at it, in the sense that when you look at sport, yes, a very great avenue for entertainment, but it's also a very important tool for social integration, bringing the community together, economic empowerment. We're paying for this. The players are also getting dividends from their talent as far as it's concerned. When you look at the lay of the land right now, what could private sector do, governments do to actually leverage this particular tool that at times is only viewed from its entertainment, watch the game and move on to other activities.
Yeah.
How can you properly leverage this tool?
I think the number one, government is a convener of different actors, but government has a particular role which we think that can be helpful is infrastructure, building arenas for competitive sports, building basketball courts, putting policies that support sports, bringing sports to schools and making physical education or PE include sports, and making sure resources are there to support that. So government can play that role. Private sector can use resources, and it's not just CSR or social resources, which is also great because it can help to bring all this access and build basketball courts and facilities and train and bring professional coaches and all of that. So they can play that role. But also in return, the private sector can benefit from sports because private sector is always looking at ways to bring their products to market. Whether it's a service or it's a product, you want consumption, you want consumers to see that you exist. Sports is one of the best platforms to actually advertise and one of the best platforms to promote your product. And the reason it's a very viable one is one, your sports is very youthful. And today the biggest consumers are youth. So you access the youth through sports, and sports gives you that platform.
Now, dialogue is important, but it's strategic action that drives real impact. Following the Nairobi convening, an actionable plan was charted for the region. This plan was debated and endorsed by member states, focusing on 8 priority areas: policy and regulatory frameworks, infrastructure development, private sector development, financial inclusion, skills development, agriculture and value chain development, regional integration and cross-border trade, and gender mainstreaming. Strong collaboration among diverse stakeholders is key to turning this African vision into reality, empowering refugees, returnees, displaced persons, and host communities. We must continue to engage, to dialogue, centering African voices and aspirations, and building strategies and partnerships that drive positive transformation in Africa. A very big thank you to all the partners who made this happen and to all the people who came to the table to share their stories, their voices, perspectives, and solutions. Now, next week, we head to Lagos, Nigeria, where the private sector tackled tough questions about solutioning for internally displaced communities. Do continue to walk with us as we amplify African voices for African solutions to drive African change. I leave you now with the inspiring Sarah Chan, who grew up as a refugee and today is the lead scout in Africa for the Toronto Raptors NBA franchise. And as we go to listen to Sarah's words of wisdom, let's remember, an African proverb tells us, hands shake each other. Alone, there's little we can achieve, but together, we can do so much. Let's go to the words of Sarah.
While others wanted to stay and work after in the US, I knew deep down in my heart I wanted to come back home, Africa, and be part of the change. I came to Kenya, and because of my background in history and political science, I enrolled for my master's at USIU and studied international relations in the field of peace and conflict. Almost at graduation, I volunteered to a basketball camp. Passion met opportunity, and my paths crossed with Masayo Ujiri, who is the vice chairman of Toronto Raptors and the president as well. The rest is history. He mentored me, and down the lane, I'm the first, and I say this with humility, the first and the only manager of African scouting for the Toronto Raptors, and no any other NBA teams have managers on the continent. Out of the need of mentorship and curbing early age marriages, and education, I founded Home at Home Foundation that is named after my mom to emulate the values that we got at home and pour back and give back to our community. And I'm so proud to say that our first girl, the pioneer, graduated from university, is back in South Sudan working, and has started her mentorship programs and basketball clinics in Kakuma refugee camp where she grew up. I'm also proud of so many things, eh? I'm also proud of my mom, who at the age of 62, graduated with her master's, and next month, at the age of 65, she graduates with her PhD, marking all of us university graduates with 3 PhDs in the family, and with myself, a master's degree. On the continent of Africa is where I found my opportunities, is where I learned basketball. And for a girl who has had all of her rights violated in every way possible, for a girl who has been spat in the face, for a race I did not choose to be born into, for a girl who has been expelled from school because of faith, for a girl who has been discriminated against because of my gender, I have learned a few things from leaders like Nelson Mandela and my parents. I've learned to forgive, rise above, and push through. Embracing the good, the bad, and the ugly, and focusing on the road and the journey ahead. In the words of Chinua Achebe, if you don't like somebody else's story, write your own.